So I'm just going to go briefly through some of the elements of the construction stage that arise and where they can affect the program of the works. So first off, as with all planning permissions, there are conditions attached to the grant of planning permission, and many of these will be statements of fact about the agreed terms of the permission, and some will outline the specific requirements which must be carried out either prior, during, or after construction. Conditions which refer to submissions of information prior to commencement for written approval are the ones which should be given particular attention when project planning. Bear in mind that there's no statutory timescale for the Council to issue confirmation of approval for submissions lodged, so it can sometimes be weeks or months before they issue, depending on the Council themselves. And the difficulty is that in order to issue a certificate of compliance on the end of the project, you have to have written approval obtained for these conditions to be discharged. Without written approval, the developer also runs the risk of having works on site being carried out without formal agreement, and on fast-track projects this could be problematic. So it's very prudent to keep chasing the Council for these written approvals as soon as they've been lodged for compliance. Another key element which should be addressed, now it applies obviously to commercial projects and for change of use projects, is the lodgement of a fire safety certificate. Certain areas of the country are experiencing a backlog of fire safety certificate applications which are resulting in requests for extensions of time being sought by the fire officers. So consideration should be given on which route best serves your project program. Now you can obviously expedite it by doing with a 7-day notice, but albeit that will be at a higher cost. Part of the next process again is prior to getting on site, the project would have to be assessed as to whether the building control amendment regulations will apply. In most instances, commercial, multi-housing units or change of use projects will require the application of the new regulations, while one-off residential developments or extensions obviously can have the opt-out route. But if applicable, then the appointment of the assigned certifier will have to be made, and a certain amount of time should be given over for the preparation of the preliminary inspection plan with the development team. In terms of the lodgement of the commencement notice, while the new system of commencement still requires a 14-day notice to be given to the Council, and works have to commence within the 28 days, the process can actually take a little bit longer. Unlike the old system where you'd have a 2-page form, download, sign, send it off with a check for €34, the new system requires the filling in of forms online, project data, downloading forms, obtaining the required signatories, and then uploading a series of documents onto the building control management system before the application for commencement is actually validated. You'll eventually receive an email from the Building Control Authority, hopefully, which will eventually give you the validation reference number. A lot of people subsequently ask for the letter that they've received confirming this. It doesn't actually come by way of a letter, it comes by way of an email. With regard to the on-site works themselves, apart from the actual construction of the works, some of the elements which can impact significantly on the project program would be the implementation of infrastructure. So it's really important that the design team engage early with the relevant council departments and the utility companies to ensure there's no issues with capacity or connection. There may be requirements for temporary solutions on site to deal with infrastructural shortfalls, and these components may actually require planning permission and or local authority approval. On the previous project that Eva referred to, there was a requirement for a temporary pumping station for the wastewater drainage, which had to connect into the council network, which hadn't come down to reach that site, and this connection had to be made 2 kilometres up the road, and in addition the telecommunication system also had to be installed pending the arrival of the permanent utilities through the ground. So these are factors that, while you might think of them as pre-planning and it's in an area where you'd assume there's a certain amount of connection, the due diligence from your engineers is going to greatly affect the program itself. On the completion stage, additional factors which have to be monitored that during the construction process in a timely manner is that if you have any variations that arise which require formal approval, they have to be dealt with before completion. So things like revised planning applications, fire safety certificates, disability asset certificates, they'll all need to be granted. So if you have variations, it's it's prudent to factor those in well in advance so that you don't get to the end and that you've got permissions that are pending. The process for applying for the completion certificate must also be factored in when nearing the end of the project, because the assessment of the application by the Building Control Authority is a 21-day process, which can also extend out to 7 days. And obviously the completion certificate is required before occupation or handover. And while taking in charge of housing estates by local authorities may not directly impact on the sale or occupation of the house, the process can be a lengthy one, and certainly early engagement with the relevant authority between your contractors and your design team members should also be considered. Sorry, I should go back. So again, just to summarise, basically that it is important to establish that all the relevant parties are consulted and the design team members engaged at the pre-planning stage. You should also ensure that the relevant departments of the councils or ancillary departments are required. For instance, if you're working with older buildings, you may need to get a BAT survey. That may require a derogation license. There are things like sites of archaeological interest. You may have to do site assessments, things that may not be apparent, when you're looking at a greenfield site. That site in Concealy obviously required an archaeological survey at the time, which took 3 to 4 weeks prior to the commencement of the main works. It's also advisable to anticipate the requests, as Eva says, for additional information. Unfortunately, you'll also have to take into consideration the third-party appeals and going to the board. And as that previous slide showed, that's a 70-week process from pre-planning to completion. And I suppose another factor is that the additional time now required just to get onto site with the commencement notice procedure is something that needs to be factored in. And as I mentioned, the on-site lead-in time, certainly with the utility companies and infrastructure, it's prudent to do your homework before you get to site. And finally, certainly allow for a minimum of 4 weeks for the completion certificate process, because it's one of the important things at the end. So thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, we'll be on stand 45 afterwards. Thanks very much.